Hi there. Are you ready for a story that might keep you up tonight? Grab a blanket, snuggle in tight, and make sure all your lights are on because this tale is going to give you chills. Tonight, I'm sharing a story about something we all have but never think too much about, our reflection. What if it wasn't just a reflection? What if it wanted to take your place? This is my story. It's called The Wrong Reflection. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment to tell me where you're tuning in from, and share this with someone who loves a good scare. Let's dive in, but I warn you, you might never look at your mirror the same way again. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was just tired. You know how sometimes you catch something out of the corner of your eye, but when you turn to look, it's gone? That's what happened. I was brushing my teeth before bed. The bathroom mirror fogged up from my shower. My hand moved up to rub my eye, but for just a split second, I thought my reflection didn't move with me. I laughed it off, of course. Mirrors can be tricky with steam and shadows. But as I reached for the light switch to leave the bathroom, I could swear I saw something. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was me. Except it wasn't me. The face in the mirror lingered, watching me longer than it should have. Must be tired, I muttered, shaking my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, things felt normal again. The mirror showed what it always showed me. Same messy hair, same sleepy eyes. Everything matched. But as the days went on, little things started to happen. Little things that didn't feel so little when they kept happening. Once, as I was tying my tie for work, I noticed the knot was perfect in the reflection, but not on me. I tilted my head, studying it. I tugged at the tie, but the man in the mirror didn't move the same way. He smirked. At least I thought he did. Nope, no way, I told myself, stepping back. Mirrors don't smirk. I didn't wear the tie that day. By the time a week had passed, I wasn't so sure anymore. Sometimes I'd stand in front of the mirror and test it. Raise my left hand, raise my right hand, blink, smile, frown. Everything matched perfectly until it didn't. It was subtle at first. A twitch here, a flicker there. Once, I caught my reflection shaking its head when I wasn't. I stopped looking in mirrors as much. But that's not easy, is it? They're everywhere. Bathrooms, cars, windows at night. No matter where I went, my reflection was always nearby, and I could feel it watching me. The worst part? It wasn't just in the mirror anymore. I first noticed it wasn't just in mirrors when I caught a glimpse of myself in the dark window of a parked car one evening. I was walking home late, and the streets were empty except for the soft buzz of streetlights. As I passed the car, I turned my head, just a glance, but my reflection was there, staring back, frozen. I stopped in my tracks. My breath felt stuck in my chest. The figure in the window didn't move, didn't blink. It was just there. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was studying me, waiting for something. The air felt heavier, colder. My legs itched to run, but I couldn't move. Then it twitched. A small, jerking motion like a glitch in an old video. That's all it took. I stumbled backward, tripping over the curb and landing hard on the sidewalk. The pain shot up my arm, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I was inside my apartment with every lock bolted and every light turned on. The apartment felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Every window, every surface that could show a reflection seemed to glow, waiting for me to look. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. My eyes darted to the small mirror in the hallway. It was empty, just the reflection of the dim hallway light. But when I moved past it, I swear I saw a shadow follow me. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the fridge. I kept checking the mirrors, certain that if I looked long enough, I'd catch it again. The reflection that wasn't mine. The next day I called in sick to work. I couldn't bring myself to leave the apartment. I felt watched, hunted. I covered every mirror and reflective surface I could find with blankets, towels, anything to block them out. But even then I felt it. That same cold presence, like someone was standing just behind me. At one point I thought I heard whispering, faint, just at the edge of hearing. It sounded like my own voice, repeating something I couldn't quite make out. I pressed my ear to the wall, thinking maybe it was the neighbors, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. That night, the power went out. I was sitting on the couch, surrounded by the muffled darkness of the covered windows, when the lights flickered and died. My phone's flashlight cast long, eerie shadows across the room. The whispers grew louder. I turned the flashlight toward the bathroom door. The mirror inside was uncovered. I'd forgotten to cover it earlier. The beam of light hit the glass, and I saw it. Not me. It was smiling. Its face was my face, but the eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, like the glass itself was alive and staring back at me. Its mouth moved, whispering something that sent chills crawling up my spine. "Let me in." I dropped the phone, the flashlight spinning wildly as it hit the floor. The shadows seemed to writhe, stretching and twisting toward me. I grabbed the phone and bolted for the door, but as I reached for the lock, the door wouldn't budge. My own reflection stared back at me from the doorknob, its grin widening. The whispers were louder now, echoing all around me, overlapping in a maddening chorus. My name, over and over. "Let me in." I ran to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. There were no mirrors in there, no windows, just darkness. I huddled in the corner, shaking as the whispers grew fainter, then stopped. The silence was worse. And then I heard it, the sound of breathing. Not mine, right behind me. I froze. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore, like every muscle had turned to stone. The breathing was slow and steady, but it wasn't my rhythm. It was deep, deliberate, and so close I could feel the warmth of it on the back of my neck. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, like invisible hands were gripping it. The air around me felt wrong. Heavy, thick, like it was pressing against my skin. I could feel something behind me, not just hear it. The space I was in seemed smaller now, as if the walls were closing in, forcing me closer to whatever was there. I didn't want to turn around, but my head started moving on its own, slowly, inch by inch. My eyes darted around the dark room, trying to focus on anything but the sensation behind me. There was nothing to see, just shadows upon shadows, stretching longer and darker as my phone's light flickered weakly in the corner where I dropped it. Then I felt it, a hand. It wasn't like a person's hand. It was cold, damp, and too strong, gripping my shoulder like it had always belonged there. The fingers dug in, not enough to hurt, but enough to make it clear I couldn't move. My chest heaved as I tried to suck in air, but the pressure on my shoulder tightened. Something whispered again, but this time, it wasn't coming from all around me. It was right in my ear. "Why do you run?" The voice sounded like mine, but wasn't. It was cracked, broken, and filled with something I can only describe as hunger. My stomach twisted into knots, and my knees buckled under me. The grip loosened just long enough for me to fall forward, hitting the ground hard. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled toward the door. My hands fumbled for the handle, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When I yanked the door open, the hallway outside wasn't the hallway I knew. It was the same, but not. The walls were darker, the lights flickered like dying candles, and the air smelled like burnt wood and metal. The whispers started again, louder this time, filling the space with a cacophony of broken syllables. My name was everywhere, twisting and turning in every voice but my own. I ran, not knowing where I was going. The hallway stretched on forever, looping back on itself, the doors multiplying, all identical. I tried opening one, but it wouldn't budge. Another was locked. Another seemed to open for a second, only to slam shut on its own before I could step inside. Then I saw it. Far down the hallway, standing perfectly still, was me. Not a reflection, not in a mirror, just me, standing there, staring, the head tilted like before. The grin on its face was wider now, too wide, stretching unnaturally across its cheeks. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light, unblinking. I stopped, frozen in place. My chest heaved with each breath, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It didn't move, just stood there watching, waiting, and then it started walking toward me. Each step was slow, deliberate, the grin never faltering. The closer it got, the colder the air became. My legs refused to move. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. When it was just a few feet away, it stopped, its head tilted further, almost unnaturally so, like it was studying me, deciding something. "You're in my way," it said, the voice not quite right. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. It crouched down, its grin twisting into something even worse, if that was possible. And then it lunged. I fell backward, my arms flailing, as it surged toward me like a shadow come to life. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing teeth that didn't belong in my mouth, sharp, jagged, too many of them. My chest felt tight, my pulse thundered in my ears, and the world around me seemed to spin. The moment it reached me, everything stopped. I was lying flat on the cold floor, my breath coming out in short, shallow gasps. The thing hovered over me, its face inches from mine. It was me, but it wasn't. Its eyes were empty, like staring into the void, and yet they burned with something alive. It whispered again, but this time it wasn't a word. It was a sound, a low, guttural hum that made my skin crawl. It raised one hand and pointed at my chest, its movements slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. My body refused to move, my limbs like dead weights. The pressure in the air grew heavier, pressing down on me, squeezing the life from my lungs. Then its finger pressed against my chest, and a searing cold spread through me. It wasn't pain, but it was worse. It was like something inside me was being pulled out, unraveled thread by thread. My vision blurred, the edges of the hallway darkening until only its face remained clear. Its grin twisted into something crueler, hungrier. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could feel it peeling something away from me, something I didn't even know was there. Suddenly, there was a sound, a loud, metallic crash echoing through the hallway. The thing's face snapped toward the noise, its grin faltering. The pressure lifted just enough for me to gasp for air, my lungs burning as I coughed and scrambled away. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I dragged myself to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me, and bolted in the opposite direction. The hallway twisted and turned, the doors on either side slamming open and shut on their own. The whispers returned, louder, more frenzied, like a chorus of voices screaming just out of reach. My own voice was among them. I didn't stop running until I saw a light ahead. A single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a weak glow over an open doorway. I didn't care where it led, I just needed to get out of that hallway. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, leaning against it as my chest heaved. The room was small and bare, with no windows and a single mirror on the far wall. My stomach dropped. The mirror was different. It wasn't reflecting the room I was in. It was showing something else, somewhere else. The image was hazy, like looking through fog glass, but I could make out shapes, figures moving in the distance, too far to see clearly. I took a hesitant step closer, my eyes locked on the glass. The figures became clearer as I approached. One of them was me. No, it wasn't just me. It was a thing. It stood among the figures, its grin gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. The figures around it were twisted, broken versions of people, their faces blurred and shifting like they were made of smoke. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the surface of the mirror. It felt warm, pulsing beneath my touch like it was alive. The thing inside turned its head sharply, its eyes locking onto mine through the glass. And then it smiled again. The figures around it turned too, their faces melting into grotesque mockeries of human expressions. They moved closer to the glass, their hands pressing against the other side, their mouths opening and closing as if they were screaming. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The mirror began to shake, the surface rippling like water. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass, but instead of breaking, it seemed to bend outward like something was trying to push through. And then I heard it, the same voice as before, but louder, deeper, filling the room. "Let me in." The glass shattered. Shards of glass exploded outward, glinting like jagged stars as they flew past me. I threw my arms up to shield my face, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. The sound was deafening, a horrible mix of grinding, tearing, and something else, like a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the mirror itself. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was gone. Not just broken, but gone like it had never been there in the first place. Instead, there was a gaping hole in the wall, dark and yawning, like the mouth of some monstrous thing. The air was wrong again, colder now, and heavy with a metallic tang that stung my nostrils. My pulse thundered as I stared at the hole, willing myself to look away, but I couldn't. And then something moved inside it. At first, it was just a shadow, subtle and flickering like a trick of the light. But it grew, stretching out of the darkness, taking shape. It was a hand, long pale, with fingers too thin, too sharp like bones covered in stretched skin. I pressed myself harder against the wall, my breaths coming in short, panic gasps. The hand gripped the edge of the hole, pulling, and something began to emerge. It was me again, but it wasn't. Its head came first, tilting unnaturally as it pushed through. The face was mine, but twisted, its mouth hanging slightly open, lips cracked and peeling. Its eyes were worse. They were black, endless pits that seemed to swallow the dim light in the room. It pulled itself through, its movements jerky and wrong, like it didn't know how to use its body. Every motion made a sickening crack, the sound of bones breaking and snapping back into place. It stood there, towering over me, its head cocked to one side, as if studying me. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My legs felt like lead, rooted to the floor. The thing smiled, slowly, deliberately, and took a step toward me. Finally, it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You let me out." I shook my head, trembling so hard I thought my bones would rattle. I didn't do anything." Its smile widened, stretching impossibly across its face. "But you looked. You saw me. That's all it takes." I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, but my body refused to listen. The thing stepped closer, the room growing darker with each movement, as if it was sucking the light from the air itself. "Do you know what it's like?" It whispered, its voice curling around me like smoke. "To be trapped? To watch you live my life, day after day, while I rot in the dark? I'm not you." I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. It laughed then, a sound that sent icy fingers crawling down my spine. "Not yet," it said, reaching out a hand. "But you will be." Its fingers brushed my arm, and a wave of cold shot through me, freezing me in place. My vision blurred, the edges darkening, as if the world was fading away. The last thing I saw before everything went black was its face, grinning, triumphant, as it whispered one final word. "Mine." When I woke up, I was lying on the floor. My body ached all over, like I'd been crushed under something heavy. The room was silent, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that made you feel safe. It was the kind that presses against your ears, making you strain to hear something, anything, just to break it. The hole in the wall was gone. The mirror was back, hanging in its place like nothing had ever happened. The surface was smooth, flawless, and empty. No cracks, no shadows, no hands reaching through. But it felt wrong. I pushed myself up on shaky arms, every nerve in my body screaming for me to leave the room, to run and never look back. My head pounded, my breath catching in my throat as I forced myself to look at the mirror. My reflection stared back at me. It looked normal. It moved when I moved, blinked when I blinked. I raised my hand, and so did it. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that it was over, that everything had been some horrible nightmare. And then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. I froze, my hand still in the air. The reflection slowly lowered its hand, tilting its head with that same unnatural curiosity, its eyes locked on mine. "You can't run," it said, its voice muffled but clear enough to cut through the silence. "Not anymore." I stumbled backward, my legs tangling beneath me. The mirror rippled, the glass warping like water, and the reflection stepped closer, closer than it should have been able to. It pressed its hands against the surface, its grin spreading wider until it split the corners of its mouth. "I'm already here." The lights in the room flickered, buzzing like angry insects. Shadows bled from the edges of the mirror, creeping along the walls and pooling on the floor. The air grew colder, biting at my skin, and I could feel it, the presence, the weight of something watching, waiting. I turned and ran. The hallway outside my room stretched on forever, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. Doors appeared and disappeared, the walls shifting as if the building itself was alive. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, louder than they should have been, like something was following me, mimicking each step. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was in the hallway, its movements jerky and unnatural, its head cocked to one side as it watched me. It didn't run, it didn't need to. It just followed, its steps slow and deliberate, as if it knew I couldn't escape. The whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping voices that filled the space. My name, over and over, called in tones that ranged from pleading to mocking. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching and twisting, reaching for me with claw-like fingers. I turned a corner and slammed into a door. It was heavy, made of dark wood, and covered in scratches that looked like they'd been made by desperate hands. I didn't think, I just threw it open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. The room was empty, except for a single chair in the center. It faced a large, full-length mirror that dominated the far wall. The glass was dark, almost black, but as I stepped closer, it began to clear. My reflection was already there. It sat in the chair, its hands resting calmly on its knees, watching me with those same empty, hungry eyes. "You can't fight it," it said, its voice echoing through the room. "You let me in. This is where you belong now." The shadows in the room shifted, moving toward me, curling around my ankles like chains. My chest tightened, my vision blurring as the thing in the mirror stood, stepping closer, its face pressing against the glass. And then the glass shattered again. The sound of the glass breaking was deafening, like 1,000 screams tearing through my ears all at once. Shards flew everywhere, glittering like ice in the dim light. I ducked, shielding my head, but I could feel the sting of tiny cuts on my arms and face as the pieces rained down around me. When I looked up, the mirror was gone. No frame, no shards, just an empty wall where it had been. The air felt heavier, colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to pulse, alive and moving with a rhythm that matched my own racing heartbeat. I thought I was alone. Then I heard it. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife, a low, wet scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. My stomach twisted as the noise grew louder, closer, until it was all I could hear. I turned slowly, every instinct screaming at me not to look, but I couldn't stop myself. In the corner of the room, where the light didn't quite reach, something moved. It wasn't walking, it was crawling, pulling itself forward with long, jagged movements. The shape was human but wrong, its limbs bending in ways that made my skin crawl. And then I saw its face. It was me, or at least it was trying to be. Its features were twisted, like they'd been molded by someone who didn't quite understand what a person should look like. The skin was too tight in some places, too loose in others, and its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to go on forever. It grinned at me, its mouth stretching wider and wider, until the skin split at the corners. Blood, thick and dark, dripped down its chin as it spoke. "Don't you see?" It rasped, its voice a grotesque parody of mine. "You're already mine?" I stumbled back, my hands groping for anything to hold on to, but there was nothing. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating. The thing crawled closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, leaving a trail of black, oily liquid in its wake. I turned and bolted for the door, my heart hammering in my chest. My fingers fumbled with the handle, slick with sweat and trembling with terror. When I finally managed to wrench it open, the hallway outside wasn't the one I had come through. It was endless, stretching into darkness, lined with mirrors on either side. Each one reflected not me, but the thing grinning and watching as I ran. The whispers came back, louder and more chaotic, echoing through the hallway until they were all I could hear. They didn't just say my name this time. They laughed, mocked, screamed. I ran as fast as I could, but the mirrors seemed to stretch with me, the reflections moving closer with every step. The air grew colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on me, slowing me, trapping me. And then in one of the mirrors, the reflection stopped. It didn't move with me anymore. It just stood there, grinning as I ran past. My stomach dropped, and I skidded to a halt, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection stepped forward, out of the glass. Its grin widened as it turned to face me, its movements slow and deliberate. Behind it, the other reflections in the mirrors began to do the same, stepping out one by one, until the hallway was filled with them. They surrounded me, their hollow eyes staring, their grins impossibly wide. I backed away, my body trembling, until I hit something solid. I turned. It was the first one, the real one. It leaned in close, its breath cold against my skin, its grin splitting its face. "There's nowhere left to run," it whispered. The air seemed to leave my lungs, replaced by something thick and suffocating. My body wouldn't move, no matter how much I screamed at it to run. The thing stood so close I could see every unnatural detail of its face. The jagged grin, the empty eyes, the way its skin rippled and twitched like it was barely holding together. Its breath wasn't warm. It was icy, like a winter wind cutting straight through me. I could feel it against my neck, sending shivers down my spine. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out the growing whispers that filled the hallway. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The thing's grin widened, its head tilting in that same unnatural way, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. "You've been running for so long," it hissed, its voice layered with so many others that it didn't sound human anymore. "But this is where it ends?" Before I could react, its hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Its touch burned, not with heat, but with cold so intense it felt like fire. I tried to pull away, but its grip tightened, its fingers digging into my skin. The other reflections began to close in, their movements synchronized like they were all one thing, one mind, one nightmare. Their whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were a deafening roar. My name was everywhere, spoken in 100 voices, each one more distorted than the last. I thrashed against its grip, my free hand clawing at its arm, but it didn't flinch. Its grin never faltered. It raised its other hand, its fingers stretching longer, sharper, until they looked like claws. "This is where you belong," it said, and its voice wasn't just in my ears anymore. It was inside my head, echoing, twisting, making it impossible to think. The shadows in the hallway surged forward, crawling up the walls and floor, wrapping around my legs like living things. I kicked at them, my panic rising as they pulled tighter, dragging me closer to the thing. "Let me go!" I finally managed to scream, my voice breaking with terror. It laughed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. "There's no letting go," it said. "You're mine now." With a sudden, jerking motion, it yanked me forward, its empty eyes staring into mine. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Everything was silent, still, and then the pain began. It wasn't like anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just physical. It was deeper, like something was being ripped out of me. My chest felt like it was caving in, my vision blurring as the thing leaned closer. Its grin stretched wider, splitting its face as it whispered one final word. "Switch." The world tilted, spinning out of control. I felt weightless and heavy all at once, like I was being pulled in every direction. My body wasn't mine anymore. I could feel it slipping away, piece by piece. And then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. I was back in my apartment, standing in front of the mirror. The glass was intact, reflecting the room perfectly. But something was wrong. I raised my hand, and so did the reflection. It moved with me, matching every motion. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't my hand. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. The skin was too pale, the fingers too long. I stepped back, and the reflection stepped with me. Its grin was gone now, replaced by something worse, an emptiness that chilled me to my core. And then it spoke. "You should have stayed," It said, its voice my own but twisted, hollow. Now I'm free. I tried to scream, but the sound didn't come from my mouth. It came from the reflection. Its grin returned, stretching wider and wider until it wasn't a face anymore, just a black void that stared back at me. The last thing I saw before the mirror shattered again was its hand reaching out, pulling me back into the darkness. The moment the darkness took me, I felt weightless, as if I were falling through an endless void. There was no up, no down, just cold, suffocating blackness pressing in on me from all sides. I reached out, trying to grab hold of something, anything, but my hands met nothing. And then I landed. It wasn't a hard landing, but it jolted me, sending a sharp chill through my body. I was lying on something cold and smooth, like glass. When I opened my eyes, there was no room, no walls, no ceiling. Just an infinite expanse of black glass stretching in all directions, reflecting the dim glow of an unseen light. I pushed myself up, my hands trembling, and looked around. At first, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the eerie stillness of the space. But then I saw them. Reflections. They weren't just in front of me. They were everywhere. Countless versions of myself scattered across the glass, each one standing at a different angle, watching me. Some were identical to me, others distorted, their faces stretched and twisted in ways that made my stomach churn. One of them stepped forward. I froze, my heart pounding as the reflection moved closer, its footsteps echoing against the glass like thunder. It wasn't me, not really. Its eyes were wrong, hollow and dark, and its grin was too wide, its teeth sharp and glinting in the dim light. "Why do you fight it?" it asked, its voice overlapping with whispers that seemed to come from everywhere. "This is where you belong now." I shook my head, backing away, but every step I took seemed to bring me closer to another reflection. They were moving now, all of them, stepping out of their glass prisons and into the space around me. Their movements were synchronized, yet each one carried a different, terrible expression, grinning, snarling, watching. "I don't belong here," I shouted, my voice cracking. The reflections laughed, a chilling, echoing sound that reverberated through the emptiness. The one closest to me tilted its head, studying me like a predator, sizing up its prey. "You've already crossed over," it said, its grin widening. "The world doesn't need two of you." Suddenly, the reflections lunged. I turned and ran, my footsteps clattering against the glass as the air grew colder, heavier. The reflections chased me, their laughter morphing into distorted screams that echoed endlessly. Their footsteps were louder than mine, faster, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I stumbled, falling to my knees, and when I looked up, I saw it a single unbroken mirror standing in the middle of the space. Its surface rippled like water, and I could see my apartment on the other side, warm and safe. I scrambled to my feet, racing toward the mirror, my breath ragged and my body screaming in protest. The reflections were right behind me there, hands clawing at the air, their voices merging into a deafening roar. Just as I reached the mirror, a hand shot out, grabbing my ankle and yanking me backward. I hit the glass floor hard, pain shooting through my body as the reflections surrounded me, their faces twisted with malice. "Stay," one of them hissed, its fingers digging into my arm. "No!" I screamed, kicking and clawing, desperate to break free. With a surge of adrenaline, I tore myself from their grasp and threw myself at the mirror. My hands hit the surface, and for a moment it felt solid. But then it gave way, and I was falling again, this time through blinding light. When I hit the ground, I was back in my apartment, sprawled on the floor in front of the broken mirror. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, my body trembling with exhaustion. But something was wrong. The room felt different, the air heavy and oppressive. I pushed myself up, my hands shaking, and looked at the mirror. The reflection wasn't me. It grinned, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. It raised a hand, pressing it against the glass, and whispered the words that still haunt me. "You can't escape." My stomach dropped as I stared at the mirror, unable to look away from the thing grinning back at me. its hand pressed against the inside of the glass, as though it were testing the boundary, pushing gently, teasingly. The surface of the mirror rippled again, like a pond disturbed by a single stone. I scrambled back, my hand slipping on the floor as I tried to put as much distance between me and that reflection as possible. But it didn't matter how far I moved. The grin never faded, and those hollow, black eyes stayed locked on mine. I escaped, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. I got out. The reflection tilted its head, mimicking my movement with a grotesque twist. Then it shook its head, the grin widening until it seemed to split its face in half. "No," it said, its voice a twisted echo of mine. "You think you escaped, but you didn't. This is only the beginning." The glass of the mirror began to crack, thin lines spreading across its surface like a spider's web. With every crack, the room grew colder, the shadows creeping along the walls and ceiling. The air felt thick, heavy, making it harder to breathe. I stumbled to my feet, my legs trembling, and turned toward the door. I needed to get out of there, out of the room, out of the apartment, away from whatever this was. My hand gripped the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. Behind me, the sound of the glass shattering filled the room. I froze, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Slowly, I turned my head, the dread rising in my chest like a wave threatening to drown me. The mirror was gone. In its place was an empty, gaping hole, just like before. And standing in front of it was the thing. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was here. Its grin was even wider now, its hollow eyes burning with something dark and alive. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as it stepped toward me. The sound of its footsteps echoed in the small room, each one sending a jolt of fear through my body. "You can't leave," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "You let me in, and now this is where you stay." I backed away, my hands fumbling against the wall, searching for something, anything to defend myself with. My fingers closed around a heavy book on the nearby table, and I swung it wildly, aiming for the thing's head. The book passed right through it, as if it weren't really there. It laughed, a sound that sent icy chills down my spine. "You can't fight me," it said. "I'm part of you now." The shadows in the room surged forward, wrapping around my ankles, my wrists, pulling me toward the hole in the wall. I thrashed against them, my panic growing as they tightened their grip, dragging me closer and closer to the dark void. "No!" I screamed, clawing at the floor, my nails scraping against the wood. "I won't go back. You can't take me." The thing crouched down in front of me, its face inches from mine. Its breath was cold, reeking of decay and something worse. "You already belong to me," it whispered. "You just haven't realized it yet." With a final, desperate surge of strength, I kicked at the shadows and lunged for the door. My hand slammed against the knob, and this time it turned. The door flew open, and I stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. But the hallway wasn't the same. It stretched on forever, lined with mirrors on either side. Each one showed a different version of me, twisted, broken, grinning. And in every reflection, the thing was standing behind me, its hollow eyes watching, waiting. "You can't run," the voices whispered, echoing from every direction. "You can't hide." I started to run anyway, the sound of laughter following me, growing louder with every step. The mirrors seemed to stretch and twist, the reflections reaching out, their hands clawing at the glass, trying to pull me in. And then I tripped. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. When I looked up, the thing was there, standing over me, its grin wider than ever. "You can't escape," it said, its voice filling the hallway. "You never could," and this time I believed it. I scrambled backward, my heart racing as I pressed against the cool, unyielding floor. The laughter echoed in my ears, a cacophony of mocking delight. I could feel the shadows creeping closer, wrapping around my legs like cold, clammy fingers, and I knew I had to act fast. "Get away from me," I shouted, my voice hoarse and desperate. I reached for the nearest mirror, its surface gleaming ominously, and without thinking, I smashed my fist against it. Glass shards exploded outward, and for a brief moment, I felt exhilarated, as if I had broken through the confines of my own fear. But instead of freedom, the shards coalesced into a swirling vortex, pulling at the edges of reality. The thing laughed again, a sound that reverberated through the air like thunder, and I realized too late that I'd unleashed something far worse. "Now you've done it," it taunted, as the vortex expanded, the glass fragments swirling like a tempest around us. "You think you can escape? You've only invited more of me in." I felt the pull of the vortex tugging at my very essence, threatening to pull me into a realm where nightmares reigned. I couldn't let that happen. With renewed determination, I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the pain radiating through my body. I needed to find a way out. "Enough!" I yelled, channeling every ounce of defiance I had left. I focused on the memories that had once made me whole, the laughter of friends, the warmth of sunlight, the feeling of safety in my own skin. I concentrated on the light they brought into my life, envisioning it as a barrier against the darkness. The shadows recoiled slightly, their grip loosening as I summoned the light within me. "You don't own me," I declared, my voice stronger now. "I'm not afraid of you." The thing's expression shifted, confusion flickering across its grotesque face. "You think you can fight me with memories? They're nothing but illusions." "Maybe," I replied, stepping forward, "but they're mine, and they're real." With that, I reached into the vortex, letting my memories surge forth. The light exploded from my fingertips, illuminating the hallway. The mirrors shattered one by one, each burst sending waves of brightness that pushed back the shadows, igniting the darkness with a fierce glow. The thing shrieked, its form distorting, twisting as the light engulfed it. "No, you can't." But I could. I pressed on, the light growing brighter, more powerful. The vortex began to collapse in on itself, the shadows retreating, howling in agony. I could feel the weight of despair lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a fierce sense of hope. In a final, blinding flash, the last of the mirrors shattered, and with it, the thing dissolved into a cloud of darkness, scattering into oblivion. The hallway transformed, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as warmth flooded in, restoring the space to its former self. Breathing heavily, I stood in the now empty corridor, the echoes of laughter replaced by a profound silence. I had faced my fear and emerged stronger, but I knew this wasn't the end. The shadows would always linger, waiting for a moment of weakness. But I had found my light, and with it, I could fight back. I turned to leave, determination coursing through me, ready to reclaim my life, one step at a time. As I made my way through the corridor, a sense of unease settled into my bones like a winter chill. The shadows that had once seemed to envelop me faded, but I could still feel their presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting for a chance to strike again. Each footstep echoed against the floorboards, and my heartbeat pulsed in my ears, a reminder that I was not free yet, not completely. The lights flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced around me. Every time they dipped into darkness, the atmosphere thickened, as if something was crawling just beneath the surface. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder as the silence threatened to swallow me whole. The hallway stretched on, and I felt an ancient menace thrumming in the air. I had to keep going, but a part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat into the safety of the chaos I had just escaped. Then, a low whisper broke through the stillness. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves on a windless night. I paused, straining to listen. "Help me." The voice drifted through the air, barely more than a breath. It was hauntingly familiar, tinged with desperation. I followed the sound, compelled, until I stood in front of a door I had never noticed before. Its surface was warped and ancient, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. As I reached for the handle, the voice grew clearer, tinged with an edge of panic. "Please don't leave me here." My heart raced as I pushed the door open reluctantly, revealing a room cloaked in shadows. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the dim light flickered, casting grotesque shapes against the walls. A single chair sat in the center, and in it was a figure, someone I knew. My breath caught in my throat. It was a past version of myself, tied down and weak, staring back with hollow eyes. Terror washed over me. "What are you doing?" I cried, stepping into the room. I stumbled into the darkness, and the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding thud. My reflection reached out, its hands trembling, desperate for something I couldn't understand. "You have to let me go," it pleaded, voice breaking. "You can't leave me like this." Feeling a surge of compassion mingled with dread, I reached out instinctively. But as my fingers brushed against the shadowy aura enveloping my other self, a piercing scream erupted through the room, and the lights flickered violently. Shadows writhed around us, twisting together to form grotesque figures that whispered my secrets, secrets I had buried in the depths of my mind. "Coward failure," they hissed, their voices a sinister chorus that echoed into infinity. "You left us behind. You run from the truth." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of their accusations. Memories flooded back. Times I had faltered, moments when I felt small and unimportant. The shadows danced closer, their fingers clawing at my skin, and I realized these weren't just remnants of fear. They were parts of me, pieces I had shunned and destitute. "No, I am not you," I screamed, pushing against the wave of despair threatening to drown me. In a moment of clarity, I understood. To escape this nightmare, I had to confront these shadows, accept every part of myself, even the dark and ugly bits. I stood and faced my other self directly, locking eyes. "I'm here," I said firmly. "I'm not abandoning you." With that declaration, a warm glow erupted from within me, driving back the shadows. The room brightened, and the figures shrieked in fury, disintegrating into wisps of smoke. My past self began to shimmer, shaking off the chains of despair that had held it captive. We merged, the frightened version and the braver, stronger me, creating a force of light that banished the lingering darkness. As the last echo of despair faded, the room transformed. It became a sanctuary rather than a prison, filled with warmth and a comforting brightness. I took a deep breath, exhaling the last of my fear. Whatever awaited me out there, I would face it, not as a victim but as a whole being, scars and all. I turned back to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hallway again, feeling the strength of my newfound light guiding me through the unraveling darkness. The shadows still lurked at the edges of my vision, but I no longer saw them as enemies. They were just parts of my story now, and I could navigate through the hall of mirrors unafraid, knowing that I had faced the darkest corners within and emerged victorious. I hadn't just escaped, I had come home to myself once more. As I stepped back into the hallway, every nerve in my body was on edge, the shadows flickering like restless spirits at the corners of my vision. The echo of my earlier scream still lingered, swirling in the air. I could sense the weight of my journey hanging over me, a mix of relief and dread knotting my stomach. The whispers that once filled my ears were silent now, yet I could feel their presence, like an unwanted touch lingering on my skin, reminding me of the secrets I had unlocked. With each step I took down the hallway, a chill ran through me. The mirrors lining the walls seemed to pulse, reflecting not just my image but something deeper, my essence strained with the remnants of fear and resilience. I caught glimpses of figures in the glass, shadows of my past entwined in a dance of sorrow. Some wore expressions of rage and anguish, while others looked at me with pity, as if they were mourning the pieces of myself I had failed to protect. I pressed my palms against the polished surfaces, bracing myself against the overwhelming flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me again. Suddenly, the lights overhead flickered and dimmed to a near-complete darkness. Panic coursed through my veins as I realized that the shifting shadows were no longer mere apparitions of my fears. They coalesced into tangible forms, grotesque and twisted, with elongated limbs and faces that were more shadow than flesh. They reached out towards me, their fingers stretching impossibly long, whispering my name in chilling unison. "Join us," they urged, their voices a deceptive lullaby. "We're one after all." The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath hanging in the air like a ghost of warmth escaping into the chill. The shadows began to close in, their voices rising into a chaotic chorus, circling me, pressing against my chest like a heavy weight. I fought against the surge of panic that threatened to swallow me whole, grounding myself in the realization that I had faced the darkness before. I gritted my teeth and focused on the warmth of the light from within, the newfound strength I had, forged in the heart of my fears. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, letting my voice burst forth, louder than I thought possible. With each word, I willed the light to expand, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. The figures hesitated, their murmurs momentarily stilled, but the darkness writhed in protest. I could feel its desperation. It wanted me to succumb, to slip back into a place of despair where it could claim me. Determined not to let it win, I reached deep into the core of my being, recalling every painful memory, every misguided thought, and every time I had wanted to run. Instead of cowering, I embraced them, allowing myself to feel the weight of each one. It became enough fuel for the light to grow, radiating from me like a beacon. The shadows hissed, retreating momentarily, their forms beginning to dissolve under the power of my resolve. But then I felt it, an icy tendril snaking around my ankle, pulling me back, almost like a lover's caress mixed with the grip of death. I looked down, horrified, as the darkness entwined itself around me, creeping up my legs, pulling relentlessly. The shadows screamed in delight, sensing my fear, and I fell to my knees, battling against the oppressive hold. I was perilously close to losing myself again, but deep within me, a spark ignited, fueled by the knowledge that I owned my truths, both dark and light. In a final act of defiance, I thrust my hand toward the shadows, channeling everything I had learned. I screamed once more, this time not just at the darkness, but for my own sake. "You are not me." The words echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the walls like a battle cry, and the shadows screamed back in a cacophony of rage. At that moment, the shadows erupted, dissolving into 1,000 glimmering particles of darkness that swirled around me before exploding outward into nothingness. The oppressive air lightened as flickers of warmth enveloped me, banishing the cold remnants of fear. Slowly, the corridor transformed, the mirrors distorting and cracking before fading, revealing a path of light that shimmered ahead. I stood up, my heart racing with the adrenaline of the battle I had just fought. The echoes of the shadows faded, replaced by a profound silence that felt, for the first time, freeing. I could breathe, and the air was lighter, as if it had been purified by the confrontation. I could finally see my way out, no longer trapped in a maze of reflection and fear. With each determined step, I moved forward, embracing the reality that I emerged stronger, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I had won, not just against the shadows, but against the darkness that lingered within me. As the light enveloped me, I felt the weight of my journey lift. I had faced my fears, embraced my vulnerabilities, and walked through the dark labyrinth of my soul. There was homecoming in that light, a whisper of resilience that told me I would carry this newfound courage wherever I went from here. The shadows could no longer possess me. I was whole again. As the light engulfed me, I thought I had truly escaped the darkness, that I had won a hard-fought battle against the shadows that haunted me. But even surrounded by brightness, unease hung in the air like a thick fog. My heart raced, a steady beat of adrenaline reminding me that I was still in a strange place, where the remnants of fear were never far behind. I stepped tentatively into the glow, the path ahead shimmering like a mirage. Each footfall echoed, reverberating against walls that seemed to pulse. But as I moved deeper into the light, a chilling realization crept over me. I was not alone. The shadows I thought had dissolved began to manifest again, lurking just beyond the edges of my perception, whispering secrets I couldn't quite understand. "Come back," a voice beckoned from the darkness, soft and inviting, yet tainted with menace. It echoed like a haunting lullaby, wrapping around me, urging me to surrender to familiarity. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on edge as I turned sharply, seeking the source of the sound. Then, I spotted a figure standing just at the periphery of the light, half hidden behind a curtain of shadow. Its outline flickered, wavering like a flame struggling to stay alive. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I saw, when the figure stepped forward into the light. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me. It was me, but different. A darker reflection, eyes filled with a haunting sadness, lips curled into a knowing smirk that sent chills spiraling down my spine. "Did you really think you could escape?" the figure whispered, voice laced with mockery. I took a step back, the words twisting in my mind. "You're not me. You're just a trick of the light." But as I spoke, the shadows around us thickened, and my counterpart's grin widened, revealing teeth that glimmered like daggers. It stepped closer, and the atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating, as though the very air was drawn from my lungs. "Every fear you buried, every regret you tried to hide, they're all part of me now." Panic swelled within me, each beat of my heart thundering like a drum in my ears. "No, I won't give in." I faced the darkness. My voice trembled, betraying the fear crawling through me. Did you? Did you really?" The darkness laughed, a sound that sent icy fingers crawling up my spine. The shadows danced around me, warping the light until it flickered like a faulty bulb, casting grotesque shadows that writhed against the walls. Beneath their depths, I caught glimpses of faces, watched desperate faces of people I had hurt, scared children with eyes full of silent screams, and the twisted faces of everyone I had pushed away. The sight was enough to make me stagger, the weight of guilt pressing down like an anchor, pulling me into the abyss. "Look at them." The doppelganger's voice dripped with satisfaction. "You've left them all behind. You think you can run from this? You think the light will save you?" I fell to my knees in that blinding light, the hope I carried starting to fade, as if daylight itself was being snuffed out by the advancing shadows. "Please stop. I don't want to see anymore." But it was too late. The shadows surged forward, enveloping me in their cold embrace, and for a moment, I felt my own essence being pulled into their depths. In that swirling vortex of despair, I could hear the whispers grow louder, a cacophony of voices rising to a deafening roar. "Coward! You can't escape the truth," they hissed, tugging at the corners of my mind. Clawed hands reached out from the darkness, grasping at my limbs, dragging me deeper into the void, where the light barely penetrated. With desperation flooding my veins, I fought back, digging my fingers into the floorboard, trying to hold on to the memory of warmth and courage. But the shadows were relentless and began to pull my consciousness into their depths, visions of my past swirling chaotically around me. My failures, my regrets, all the moments that had shaped me, but also imprisoned me. Suddenly, the darkness whispered something I had never thought would haunt me. "This is who you really are?" It struck me like a blow to the chest, leaving me breathless and shaken. I started to flail against the oppressive hold, pushing against the waves of despair crashing over me. "No, I won't accept this," I shouted, my voice echoing in the dark. In that moment of blind rage, I reached out toward my other self, the person I saw in the shadows. "I can't run anymore. I can't hide," I cried, and with that admission, the energy within me surged. What had once felt like surrender transformed into a spark of defiance. "Don't you see?" I yelled, anger rising in my throat. "I'm not just the failure you think I am. I am more." As I shouted, a vortex of light exploded from my center, pushing against the shadows with a force that made the ground tremble. The figures that had tormented me began to shriek, their faces contorting in rage and sorrow, and I felt the grip of the darkness loosen with each word I spoke. "You are part of me, but you do not define me." The words echoed and ricocheted off the walls, sending tremors through the shadowy forms. With every declaration, I felt strength returning, illuminating both my tainted past and my hopeful future. I dug deeper into the light within, letting my defiance fuel its fire, each echo amplifying my resolve until the shadows started to crumble, giving way to warmth that flooded my senses. In a flash of brilliance, the oppressive darkness fractured, splitting open to reveal the glimmering truth behind my fears. I felt the shadows retreat, twisting and writhing in pain as the light consumed them, dissolving their forms into tendrils of black smoke, exhaling despair into nothingness. But I could sense something lurking beyond the veil of light, something that wasn't finished with me yet. As the final echoes of the shadows faded and the light dimmed to a soft glow, I realized there was still a presence watching, waiting for a chance to re-emerge from the depths of the void. And the path was still shrouded in uncertainty, each step forward taking me deeper into the unknown, where my greatest fears still lurked just beyond my sight. The shadows had retreated, but they weren't truly gone. I held my breath, scanning the horizon of light in search of answers, knowing the real battle was still ahead, and if I wasn't careful, the shadows could creep back in when I least expected it. As I stood there, heart racing, a deep sense of foreboding washed over me. The shadows, though waning, still lay in wait, lurking just outside the periphery of the soft light. I felt a thrum beneath my feet, an almost rhythmic pulsing that seemed to resonate from the ground itself, like a heartbeat echoing in the hollow stillness. I dared to take a step forward, straining my ears to catch any sound in the heavy silence. For a moment, everything felt too quiet, too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But beneath that calm was a subtle, unsettling tension, an energy that prickled my skin and set my instincts on high alert. What next? I murmured to myself, the words slipping out in a whisper. Just as I finished speaking, an answer materialized in the air, a deep rumble that wound through the sprawling darkness. "Come find us," the voice echoed, smooth and icy, slithering through the chords of despair. It was an invitation wrapped in a taunt, beckoning me to dive deeper into the shadows. Striking a balance between dread and curiosity, I hesitated, caught in the web of my own fears. But that curiosity, so dangerous yet intoxicating, drew me closer to the source. Alarm bells clanged in my mind, but I suppressed them. I had faced darkness before, and I could do it again. Steeling myself, I pressed onward, each step resonating like a war drum against the stillness. The air around me thickened, growing heavy with the promise of revelation or destruction. Then, something in the dark shifted. A figure swam into view, barely distinguishable at first, clothes jarring against the absorbing shade. My heart lurched. Was it a person? Or a trick of the shadows trying to lure me into a false sense of security? I squinted, trying to breathe through the surge of anxiety. And as I did, the figure slowly moved into the light, revealing a face so familiar yet terrifying. It was me, but with darkened eyes that held a sorrowful emptiness, lips twisted into a cruel smirk. My doppelganger stood there unmoving, a reflection of every insecurity I had fought so hard to overcome. I staggered back again, understanding now that this was more than just a cruel trick of the light. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice wavering between anger and fear. "To show you what you try to hide," it replied, its voice a cold whisper that slid through the air like smoke. "Look closer." Suddenly, the ground beneath me began to ripple, as if alive, and before I could react, scenes of my life unfolded around us, the shadows warping them into grotesque caricatures. I witnessed distorted images of my childhood, moments of joy twisted into despair, happy laughter transformed into cries of anguish, friends morphing into shadows that turned away from me, their faces grimacing in disappointment. "No!" I gasped, trying to look away, but the images captivated me like a cruel spell. Each sight pulled at my heart, revealing hidden wounds I had long ago buried. The stinging pain bubbled to the surface, erupting feelings I thought I had dealt with. My counterpart stepped closer, invading my personal space, its breath icy against my skin. This is your reality now. Every time you failed, every time you were scared, you chose to hide. Stop, I murmured, gripping my head, willing the memories to fade, but they clawed their way in deeper, invading my thoughts with torrid whispers. I'm not like that anymore. The shadows that lingered morphed into grotesque figures behind me, their eyes burning with judgment. They watched with a hunger that was unsettling, twisting my heart with every glance. I felt like I was on display, stripped bare, my very essence a target for their scorn. Are you so certain? The doppelganger grinned wider, its face contorting in a way that made my stomach churn. Look at them. They see you for who you really are. The cold fingers of doubt crept in, wrapping around my mind until I could barely breathe. I roiled against the sensation, fighting the urge to crumble under the weight of my past. But it was suffocating, the air thick with their laughter. Each taunt spiraled around me, echoing my insecurities until the sound morphed into one cacophonous chant that resonated through the darkness. Failure, coward alone. In desperation, I clawed at the ground, seeking purchase against the invisible tide that threatened to drown me in despair. No, these shadows don't own me, I shouted, a raw defiance spearing through my anguish. I am more than this. The shadows hissed, recoiling slightly as the force of my words pushed back against the darkness. The image of my doppelganger flickered, momentarily losing its composure. In that moment of vulnerability, a spark ignited within me, reminding me of everything I had fought to become. But just as that light surged, something darker loomed, a growing pulse of energy that crackled through the air, the floor trembling beneath me. You think you can escape? They whispered, and suddenly, the ground began to fracture, splintering into dark chasms that threatened to swallow me whole. I looked around, panic tightening in my chest as the shadows swelled and advanced, merging into a singular mass of dark energy. The weight of it pressed down with relentless intensity, forcing me to my knees as the echoes became deafening, a whirlwind of mockery and despair that threatened to drag me into the abyss. But then I remembered the light inside me, the strength that had grown from my confrontation with my fears. Gathering my resolve, I stood tall, defiance flaring in my heart as I screamed against the rising tide. I won't let you take me. With a sudden, fierce determination, I released the warmth radiating from within, channeling every ounce of courage and vulnerability that painted my true self. The shadows shrieked, caught off guard as the light exploded forth, pushing back the suffocating darkness. The fractures in the ground began to close, the dark energy thrashing like a cornered beast, but I refused to back down. Heavy bolts of energy intertwined with a bright luminescence, a force strong enough to challenge the very essence of fear itself. As the shadows retreated, I could feel their anger coiling around me, but I pressed forward, stepping into the surge of my own light. I wouldn't be consumed. I would create my own path. And so, I advanced into the darkness once more, knowing that the battle was far from over. With every step, the echoes of my past faded slightly, replaced by the steady heartbeat of purpose, guiding me onward into the unknown. As I pressed onward into the undulating darkness, the shadows writhed and twisted, their forms becoming grotesque parodies of the fears I had carried for so long. Each step I took resonated like a heartbeat, a reminder of my defiance. But with every breath, the oppressive weight of despair threatened to shatter my resolve. Tendrils of darkness licked at my ankles, whispering accusations and memories meant to cripple my spirit. Remember the choices you made? They hissed, voices clawing through my mind, filling it with images of missed opportunities and shattered dreams. Faces I recognized flickered in and out of existence, friends long lost to misunderstanding, opportunities squandered, and the palpable loneliness that wrapped around me like a shroud. I felt a chill sweep through the air, as though the encroaching shadows were feeding off my lingering self-doubt, growing stronger with each moment. Just when I thought I might be overwhelmed, something shifted within me, a resolve born from the very depths of my despair. I clenched my fists, drawing on that inner light once again. "You don't own me!" I shouted defiantly, my voice piercing through the cacophony of taunts and jeers. The shadows recoiled slightly, as though my words had physical weight, holding them back for just a moment. It was enough of a spark to fuel my confrontation, but they were relentless. The darkness began to pulse, the very ground shaking violently beneath my feet, threatening to swallow me whole. The air crackled with an electric tension, and I could see blinding flashes of light as shadows twisted and writhed in chaos. With each pulse, it felt as if I were being ripped apart at the seams, my very essence in danger of being devoured by the shadows I had created. Then I saw it, a glimmer of light at the far end of the darkness, a beacon shining beyond the horizon of despair. It flickered uncertainly, but it was there. A heat blossomed in my chest, pushing back against the cold tendrils that sought to chain my feet. I took a deep breath, channeling that warmth into strength, allowing it to flow through me like molten gold. "If you want to keep me here," I yelled, "you'll have to fight me for it." The shadows surged forward, howling in anger, but I stood firm, feeling the light inside me grow into an unstoppable force. I began to move towards that flickering beacon, each step a battle, but I was no longer afraid. I remembered what I fought for: hope, acceptance, the parts of me that deserved to shine. As I neared the light, it burst forth, illuminating the dark like a supernova, blinding and brilliant. The shadows retaliated, swirling violently, but they met their match. They were tearing at my spirit, trying to drag me back into their abyss, but I pulled from the depths of my heart, the strength of all I had faced. I could feel the light growing, becoming an extension of my determination. "Enough!" I shouted, summoning my courage like a shield. With that cry, the pulsating light enveloped me, merging with the shadows and forcing them to recede. The air crackled around me, heavy with tension, and a low growl resonated through the ground as the shadows writhed, eventually losing their grip. The darkness clawed at the edges of the light, trying to pull me back, but I refused to falter. I embraced the warmth, letting it consume me, until there was nothing left of doubt, only purity and strength. The shadows screamed in fury as my light merged into a blinding explosion, illuminating every corner of the dark space that had once felt like a prison. With one final surge, I drove forward, feeling the push of the light breaking through the layers of despair. The shadows shrieked, their anger transforming into anguish as they were pulled into the brilliance, dissolving like smoke in a gust of wind. For an instant, everything went still. I stood in an expanse of radiant light, overpowering the remnants of darkness, every inch of me alight with strength and clarity. The shadows were not just lost, they had disintegrated, leaving behind only echoes of their haunting presence. I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me as the last remnants of fear dissolved into nothingness. In that moment of triumph, I understood the truth. My battle against the dark was not just about defeat, but reclamation. I had to confront fear and loneliness, nostalgia and regret. With those shadows gone, there was only the brilliance of the light I had uncovered within myself, illuminating the way forward. The air felt fresh, and I breathed deeply, each breath a celebration of strength and resilience. As the remnants of fear slipped away, I walked forward, ready to embrace a new beginning. An unfamiliar comfort settled in my chest, allowing space for hope, dreams, and healing to flourish. I may have entered the darkness as lost, but I emerged with an unbreakable spirit, knowing that the shadows could never truly own me again. I had faced my fears and emerged victorious, ready to face whatever came next, stepping into a new chapter filled with the promise of dawn, a bright, endless horizon waiting just for me.